The cold wind howled through the trees as Dr. Ethan Carter adjusted his backpack, staring at the rusted chain-link fence ahead. Beyond it lay their destination, a long-forgotten military installation buried deep within the forest. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was known as Site Echo 17, a rumored Cold War-era facility where classified experiments had taken place. Ethan glanced at his team, Dr. Sophia Reed, an archaeologist specializing in military history, Nathan Briggs, a former Marine-turned-security specialist, and Daniel Park, a documentary filmmaker hoping to uncover the truth about the site. They had spent months researching scattered reports about the bunker, whispers of human testing, vanished personnel, and a government cover-up. Now, they stood at the threshold of whatever secrets had been buried here. "This is our last chance to turn back," Ethan said, though he knew none of them would. Nathan smirked. "We've come too far for that." Sophia unrolled a map, tracing a line with her gloved finger. "The entrance should be about 50 yards ahead. If the reports are accurate, it's hidden beneath a collapsed storage shed." Daniel adjusted his camera, the red light blinking. "Let's get some footage of the approach. If this place really housed secret experiments, people deserve to know the truth." Ethan nodded, then led the group forward. The forest thickened as they pushed through the undergrowth. Each step felt heavier, weighed down by the eerie silence that had settled around them. Even the usual sounds of nature, chirping birds, rustling leaves, seemed absent. After a few minutes, they reached the remains of a wooden structure, now nothing more than rotted beams and broken planks. The entrance should be beneath it. Nathan crouched and started clearing debris. "Help me with this," he grunted. Together, they pulled away the wreckage until a rusted metal hatch was exposed. It bore no markings except a faded warning, "Authorized personnel only. Use of deadly force permitted." Sophia shivered. "This is the real deal." Ethan ran his fingers over the latch, then gave Nathan a nod. The ex-Marine produced a crowbar and wedged it into the seam, straining until the rusted mechanism gave way with a deafening creak. A foul, stale odor wafted up from the darkness below. Daniel adjusted his camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," he murmured, "we're about to step into history." Ethan clicked on his flashlight and peered down the ladder leading into the abyss. His gut twisted with unease, but it was too late to back out now. "Let's go." One by one, they descended into the forgotten bunker. The air grew colder as Ethan climbed down the rusted ladder, the metal groaning beneath his weight. His flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing concrete walls stained with age and decay. The scent of mildew and something rotting clung to the air. When he reached the bottom, his boots hit the damp floor with a soft squelch. Water? No. The texture felt thicker. He aimed the light downward and saw a dark, sticky substance pooling in the cracks of the concrete. He swallowed hard but said nothing. One by one, the others followed. Nathan was next, landing lightly and raising his pistol in one fluid motion. He swept the area before giving an all-clear nod. Sophia and Daniel came down after, their footsteps hesitant. "This place is worse than I imagined," Sophia muttered, pulling her scarf over her nose. "The air's," she coughed. "It's stale. Like something's been rotting for years." Daniel adjusted his camera, the red light blinking in the darkness. "Perfectly creepy. This is gold." Nathan ignored him and focused on a steel door ahead. The paint had long since chipped away, exposing corroded metal beneath. A small sign was bolted to it, barely readable under layers of grime. "Restricted Zone. Biohazard Protocol in effect." Nathan ran a gloved hand over the door. "Locked. Let's find another way in," Ethan suggested, directing his light down a corridor that stretched deeper into the facility. The walls bore deep scratches, as if something had clawed at them. He frowned. "This doesn't look like normal wear and tear." Sophia traced the marks with her fingers. It almost looks like, she hesitated. Like someone was trying to get out. Silence settled over them. Nathan exhaled sharply. Whatever happened here, it's ancient history. No one's left. They pressed forward. The hallway led them past rusted pipes, flickering emergency lights, and abandoned workstations covered in dust. Papers lay scattered on the floor, their text faded, but some words stood out. Experiment 34. Termination protocol. Containment failure. Daniel crouched and aimed his camera at one document. Containment failure, he read aloud. That's always a good sign. Sophia shivered. We should be careful. As they rounded the next corner, a set of metal double doors loomed ahead, slightly ajar. Beyond them, a vast room stretched into darkness. Ethan hesitated before pushing one open. The door groaned, revealing what looked like a medical bay. Rows of examination tables lined the room, each equipped with thick restraints. Dried stains, brownish red, marked the surfaces. Cabinets filled with rusted surgical tools stood against the far wall. A single, overturned wheelchair sat in the center of the room, its wheels coated in dust. Daniel stepped forward, his camera whirring softly. Jesus! This place! Sophia lifted a clipboard from one of the tables. The name at the top had faded, but the patient notes were chilling. Subject exhibited violent resistance. Increased dosage ineffective. Muscle atrophy progressing. Cognitive function, deteriorating. Nathan scanned the area, his posture tense. I don't like this. We need to stay sharp. Ethan turned toward the far end of the room, where a single observation window overlooked them. It was shattered, jagged glass still clinging to the frame. Behind it, another dark hallway stretched beyond sight. Something about it felt wrong. He didn't know why, but he had the creeping sensation that they weren't alone. Ethan's pulse quickened as he stared at the shattered observation window. The longer he looked, the more he felt as if something was looking back. Ethan, Sophia's voice pulled him back. What is it? He hesitated. Nothing. Let's keep moving. Nathan led the way toward the far exit, sweeping his flashlight across the walls. More deep scratches marred the surface. Some formed patterns, like symbols hastily carved in desperation. Others looked violent. Someone lost their mind down here, Nathan muttered. Maybe a prisoner, maybe staff. Ethan didn't respond. His gut told him they were missing something. They stepped into the next hallway, where a red emergency light flickered, barely illuminating the space. To their right, another rusted door stood slightly open. A thick black stain seeped from beneath it. Daniel, ever the fearless documentarian, adjusted his camera. Let's take a look. Nathan moved forward first, pushing the door open with his boot. It creaked, revealing a dormitory, or what remained of one. Rows of metal-framed beds stood against the walls, sheets still tucked in, stiff with age. Lockers had been overturned, their contents spilled across the floor. But what caught their attention was the corpse slumped against the far wall. Or what used to be a corpse. The figure was mummified, its skin stretched tight over bones, its mouth frozen in a twisted scream. Its arms were still bound by a tattered straitjacket, the fabric ripped and torn as if it had fought against its restraints until the very end. Sophia covered her mouth. God! Daniel zoomed in, his camera clicking. How the hell did no one ever find this place? Ethan crouched beside the remains, examining the brittle skin. It was dry, too dry for something that should have decayed normally in an underground, humid environment. He lifted the tag still attached to the straitjacket. Subject number 12. Project Sapiens. Sophia leaned over his shoulder. Project Sapiens. Ethan's mind raced. He had heard that name before, buried in Cold War-era conspiracy theories. A secret government program to enhance soldiers, experimenting with neurological conditioning, forced evolution, and genetic modification. It was supposed to be a myth, he said quietly. Nathan exhaled sharply. Yeah, well, looks like it wasn't. Sophia examined the nearby lockers, her gloved hands brushing away dust. Inside, she found neatly stacked patient files, the pages yellowed with age. The names had been redacted, but the medical notes were intact. Increased aggression. Unresponsive to sedatives. Muscle hypertrophy observed. Enhanced strength beyond control. Psychotic breaks increasing. Subjects turning on staff. Ordered termination of all active cases. She turned to Ethan, her face pale. They tried to make soldiers, but they made monsters. Daniel stepped toward the back of the room, where a heavy metal door stood locked with 4 industrial-grade deadbolts. A warning sign was plastered across it. Do not open under any circumstances. Nathan frowned. Something tells me they weren't locking people out. A loud crack echoed through the hallway outside. They froze. It sounded like metal shifting. Like something moving. Nathan raised his gun, motioning for them to stay quiet. For the first time since entering the bunker, Ethan felt something he hadn't before. A deep, gnawing certainty. They were not alone. Silence fell over the team as the sound of shifting metal echoed through the corridor. Nathan instinctively raised his pistol, his eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway beyond the dormitory. The others held their breath. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. It could have been the building settling, a loose pipe shifting, something normal. But his gut told him otherwise. Daniel, ever the documentarian, raised his camera and whispered, "Did anyone else hear that?" "No shit," Nathan muttered. He gestured toward the door. "Stay close." Moving with practiced precision, he stepped out into the hallway first, gun raised. The others followed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with more rusted doors. Some were slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of abandoned rooms, bunk quarters, broken-down offices, a supply closet with its contents spilled across the floor. Then they saw it. Further down the hall, near a T-junction, a metal storage rack had toppled over. Cans and supplies lay scattered across the floor. But what set their nerves on edge wasn't the mess, it was the fact that the dust had been disturbed. Something, or someone, had been through here recently. Nathan signaled for silence and crept forward, checking each doorway as he passed. Ethan followed, gripping his flashlight so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sophia and Daniel stayed at the rear, their movements slow and cautious. As they reached the fallen rack, Nathan knelt and examined the floor. "Footprints," he murmured. Ethan swallowed hard. "Human." Nathan shook his head. "Can't tell." He stood up and faced the junction ahead, where the hallway split left and right. One path led deeper into the facility. The other, marked by a heavy steel door that had been wrenched off its hinges, led into what appeared to be an observation wing. The twisted metal frame of the door sent a chill down Ethan's spine. It hadn't simply rusted loose. It had been ripped open. Nathan nudged it with his boot. Whatever did this had serious strength. Sophia aimed her flashlight into the room beyond. Large glass viewing windows lined the walls, some shattered, their broken shards crunching beneath their boots as they stepped inside. In the center of the room stood a surgical chair, its restraints hanging loose. Dark stains covered the floor beneath it. Against the far wall, monitors and medical equipment lay in ruin, wires tangled like veins spilling from gutted machinery. Then Daniel exhaled sharply. "Oh, hell no." Ethan turned to see what he was looking at, a row of containment cells. Each was separated by thick glass, some fogged over with age. The first few were empty. But as they moved deeper, they found one that wasn't. Inside, a corpse sat slumped against the glass. At first, it seemed like another long-dead victim of whatever had happened here. But as Ethan stepped closer, his flashlight revealed something wrong. The body was fresh. Its skin was still intact, its clothes not yet fully deteriorated. The eyes, clouded with death, stared blankly ahead. But the worst part? The fingernails were broken and bloody, as if the person had been trying to claw their way out. Sophia stumbled back, covering her mouth. This doesn't make sense. How could this body be so recent? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The same realization was dawning on all of them. They weren't the first ones down here. And worse. Whoever had been trapped in that cell hadn't been alone. Nathan's radio crackled. A burst of static. Then a faint noise, almost like breathing. They all turned to him. He adjusted the frequency, his face tense. It's picking up something. A low voice whispered through the speaker. Help me. The blood in Ethan's veins turned to ice. It had come from deeper inside the bunker. The distorted whisper from the radio sent a jolt of fear through the team. Help me. Nathan adjusted the dial, his jaw tightening. Who is this? Static. Then, a faint, wet breath. Ethan stepped closer. It's coming from inside the bunker. Sophia shook her head, backing away from the radio. No. That's impossible. Daniel, gripping his camera, exhaled shakily. Either someone's screwing with us, or there's something down here we weren't meant to find. Nathan let the radio hang by his side. We keep moving. No splitting up. We get what we came for and we get out. Ethan nodded, though deep down, he wasn't sure escape would be so easy. They left the observation room, stepping over shattered glass and twisted metal. The corridor ahead led into the lower levels. A rusted sign on the wall read. Sublevel 2, Medical Ward. Sublevel 3, Containment. Sublevel 4, Bioweapons Division. Nathan pointed to the second floor. That's where we start. We need to know what they were doing here. The team descended the metal staircase, their footsteps echoing against the walls. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The air grew thick with moisture and decay. The medical ward was a graveyard of horrors. Rusting gurneys were overturned, medical cabinets had been emptied in a panic, and thick chains hung from the ceiling, some still attached to rotting leather restraints. Dark smudges on the floor hinted at struggles that had long since ended. Daniel filmed everything, his camera's light casting eerie shadows across the ruined facility. This is insane, he muttered. They weren't just experimenting. They were, he swallowed. They were torturing people. Ethan's flashlight landed on a glass examination chamber at the far end of the room. It was cracked, as if something had punched through from the inside. Next to it, a file cabinet stood half open. He stepped forward, brushing away the dust, and pulled out a patient file. The name was redacted, but the notes were chilling. Subject number 34. Increased physical strength beyond projected limits. Reflexes enhanced. Pain response diminished. Cognitive function, unstable. Violent outbursts escalating. Emergency sedation ineffective. Subject broke restraints. Do not engage without armed response. Ethan's hands shook as he closed the file. Nathan cursed under his breath. They weren't making soldiers. They were making weapons. Then, a loud bang. It came from the hallway behind them. Everyone froze. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Not slow, cautious steps. Heavy, deliberate ones. Nathan spun, gun raised. Who's there? Silence. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. The air felt thick, like they were being watched. Then, from somewhere deep in the darkness, a low, guttural growl. Not human. Sophia's breath hitched. Oh my God. Nathan took a step back. We need to move. Now. They turned and bolted for the exit, flashlights bouncing wildly. Ethan didn't dare look back, but he could hear it, something big, something fast, moving in the dark. The stairwell was just ahead. Nathan reached it first, grabbing the railing. Then the lights flickered, and went out. A deafening crash. The sound of something slamming into the walls. And then, a scream. Daniel's. Then, silence. Ethan spun, breath coming in gasps. His flashlight flickered back on. Daniel was gone. Only his camera remained, shattered on the floor, its red recording light still blinking. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Daniel was gone. His camera lay broken on the floor, its red light flickering, still recording, still capturing the empty space where he had stood just seconds ago. Daniel? Ethan's voice cracked as he swept his flashlight across the corridor. Nothing. No blood, no footprints. Just emptiness. Sophia clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. He was right there. He was. Nathan grabbed Ethan's shoulder. We can't stay here. We need to keep moving. Ethan's legs felt frozen, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. It made no sense. Daniel had screamed, and then, in an instant, he had been erased from existence. What the hell took him? Sophia whispered. Nathan's grip tightened on his gun. I don't know. But we're not waiting to find out. He turned and ran toward the stairwell. Ethan forced himself to follow, pulling Sophia along as she stumbled. Every shadow felt alive, every creak of the bunker a whisper of something lurking just beyond the edge of their vision. They reached the stairs, practically throwing themselves onto the metal steps. As they climbed, the bunker's air grew heavier, thick with something rotten and unnatural. Then, halfway up. Boom. The entire bunker shook. Ethan grabbed the railing, his flashlight swinging wildly. Below, the corridor they had just escaped from was now swallowed in darkness. Then, a sound. A deep, ragged breath. Something big was down there. And it was waiting. Nathan didn't hesitate. Move. Move. They sprinted the rest of the way up, their footsteps clanging against the rusted stairs. When they reached the next level, Nathan slammed the emergency hatch behind them and spun the wheel to lock it shut. Silence. They stood in a storage bay, rows of rusting metal shelves stretching into the darkness. Crates lay broken open, their contents long since raided or decayed. The only sound was their frantic breathing. Sophia collapsed against the wall, her body shaking. Daniel's gone. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He was just gone. Ethan crouched beside her, trying to calm his own racing heart. He didn't have an explanation. No logic, no reasoning. Just fear. Nathan checked his gun, his expression unreadable. We don't stop. We keep moving. We get to the surface. But Ethan knew something Nathan didn't want to admit. There was no way back. The entrance was still miles above them. They had barely scratched the surface of the secrets buried beneath. And whatever had taken Daniel, whatever had been locked down here for decades, was still watching. Sophia wiped her face, forcing herself to stand. Okay. What's the plan? Nathan exhaled. We head for the security room. Find a map. Find a way out. Ethan nodded, gripping his flashlight tighter. And if we find Daniel? Nathan hesitated, his jaw clenching. Then we hope there's something left to find. A chill ran through Ethan's spine. The deeper they went, the stronger the feeling became. They were walking straight into a trap. The bunker felt alive. Ethan could hear it breathing. Not literally, of course, but the way the metal groaned, the pipes hissed, the unseen presence lurked in the shadows, it was as if the entire structure had a pulse. They moved quickly through the storage bay, Nathan leading the way with his gun raised. Sophia clung to Ethan's side, her flashlight flickering as they stepped over fallen debris and rusted crates. Ahead, a sign jutted out from the wall, covered in dust. Security room. Nathan nodded. That's where we need to be. They moved deeper into the corridor, past old surveillance monitors flickering with static. Some screens were shattered, others displayed nothing but empty hallways they had just walked through. And then, one of the screens changed. Ethan stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The static cleared, revealing a room filled with containment cells. And inside one of them, Daniel. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. His hands slammed against the glass, his mouth forming words, but there was no sound. Daniel. Sophia gasped, rushing toward the monitor. He's alive. Ethan leaned in closer. Daniel's movements were frantic, his mouth moving fast, he was trying to tell them something. Nathan studied the screen, his jaw tightening. Something's wrong. Look at him. Ethan did. And then he saw it. Daniel's tears. He wasn't just panicked. He was pleading. Begging. And then, Daniel's eyes snapped toward the camera. His expression changed. Fear became horror. And then the screen cut to static. Sophia screamed. No, no, no. Bring it back. She slammed the console with her fists, but the screen remained dead. Nathan took a slow breath. He's on the containment level. Ethan turned toward him. We can't leave him. Nathan hesitated. Then, he nodded. We get in, we get him, we get out. He turned toward the security console, flipping switches. A blueprint of the bunker flickered to life on one of the monitors. The containment level was 3 floors below. Sophia wiped her face. How do we get there? Nathan's eyes scanned the map. Then he found it. A maintenance shaft. It's a shortcut, he said. But we don't know what's down there. Ethan swallowed hard. We know enough. Nathan grabbed his radio, adjusting the frequency. Daniel, if you can hear me, we're coming. Static. Then, a whisper. Don't. Ethan's blood ran cold. The voice was Daniel's. But it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the hallway behind them. They all turned. The corridor was empty. And yet, somewhere in the dark, something was breathing. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The whisper had come from behind them, but when he swung his flashlight down the corridor, there was nothing there. Just an empty hallway lined with broken surveillance monitors and decayed walls. And yet, something had spoken. Sophia took a step back, her body trembling. That was Daniel. That was his voice. Nathan slowly raised his gun. No. That was something pretending to be him. Ethan's fingers clenched around his flashlight. The air had changed, thicker, heavier, colder. The bunker wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting. Nathan turned back to the blueprint on the security console. We're still going after Daniel. Sophia stared at him. Are you serious? He's alive, Nathan said. We saw him. Sophia shook her head violently. We don't know that. We don't even know what we just heard. Ethan looked at the screen, at the layout of the bunker. The maintenance shaft was their only option, it would take them straight to containment. He swallowed hard. I'm going. Nathan nodded. Then let's move. Sophia cursed under her breath but followed. They moved quickly, following the map through the dark corridors. The bunker felt colder with every step, as if they were descending into a place where warmth, where life, no longer existed. Finally, they found the maintenance shaft. The hatch was rusted shut, but Nathan pried it open with his knife. A deep, vertical tunnel stretched below them, vanishing into total darkness. A metal ladder led down, but beyond their flashlight beams, they couldn't see the bottom. Ethan took a shaky breath. I'll go first. Nathan grabbed his shoulder. Slow and steady. Ethan nodded and swung his legs into the shaft. The metal rungs were ice cold as he began his descent. 1 step. 2. The walls of the shaft narrowed around him, pressing in with every movement. The deeper he went, the stronger the smell of rot and rust. Then, a sound below. A faint scraping. Ethan froze. Silence. Then, another scrape. Something was down there. He held his breath, heart hammering. Nathan, he whispered. No response. He glanced up. Nathan and Sophia were still at the top of the shaft, looking down at him. But their faces were pale. Horrified. Then Nathan whispered, Ethan, don't look down. Cold terror coiled around Ethan's spine. And then, he heard it. A wet breath. Just inches below his feet. Something was waiting in the dark. And it was breathing right against his legs. Ethan's body locked up. He gripped the ladder so tightly his knuckles turned white. Something was down there. And it was breathing. The air smelled of rot and damp metal. The sound, wet, ragged, hungry, rose from the darkness just inches below him. Nathan's voice was tight with fear. Ethan. Climb. Now. Ethan's muscles screamed as he scrambled up the ladder. His boots slipped against the rusted metal, his breath coming in short gasps. Then, it moved. A sharp, scraping sound. Something brushed against his leg. Ethan jerked away just in time. A hand, or something like a hand, grazed his ankle, its fingers long, thin, and slick. His heart slammed against his ribs. He climbed faster, not daring to look down. Nathan reached out, grabbing his arm and hauling him out of the shaft. Ethan collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, panting. His leg burned where the thing had touched him, but there was no time to check. Boom. The shaft shook violently. A deep, guttural growl echoed from below, rattling through the walls. The metal rungs screeched as something clawed its way up. Sophia screamed. Shut it. Nathan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the hatch and slammed it closed just as something slammed against it from the other side. Thud. The impact sent a shudder through the floor. Dust rained from the ceiling. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slow, dragging scratches against the metal hatch. Ethan stared at the door, heart racing. The thing wasn't leaving. It was waiting. Nathan backed away, breathing hard. We're not going down there. Sophia's hands were shaking. Then how do we get to Daniel? Ethan swallowed. His mind was still spinning, still trying to process what had touched him. But one thing was clear, they couldn't go back. Nathan turned toward the map on the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead. There's another way. An old elevator shaft. If it's not collapsed, we can use it. Ethan nodded, trying to push the fear down. Then let's go. They left the hatch behind, but Ethan could still hear it. A faint, inhuman breathing. Still waiting. Still listening. And it knew their names. The air in the bunker felt thick with tension, as if every inch of space was pressing in on them. Ethan could feel the weight of it on his chest, suffocating him with every step. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing down the narrow hallway, sharp and heavy. Nathan led the way, his gun raised, eyes darting back and forth as though expecting something to jump out at them at any moment. Sophia was close behind, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Every so often, she would glance over her shoulder, her eyes flicking to the darkness, the ever-present feeling of being watched pressing against her mind. Ethan stayed at the back of the group, glancing nervously at the walls. The bunker seemed to be closing in on them, the corridors narrowing as they progressed deeper. The silence felt unnatural, broken only by their footsteps and the occasional groan of the walls, as though the entire structure was alive, shifting. Finally, Nathan stopped in front of a large, rusted door. He pulled out a set of keys, the metal clinking against each other as he slid the correct one into the lock. The door creaked open. Beyond it was an elevator shaft, a deep, dark hole in the ground. The elevator had long since been destroyed, its cables severed, leaving only a jagged, empty space. "That's our way down," Nathan said, pointing to a ladder secured to the wall on the far side of the shaft. Ethan's stomach churned. The ladder led down into nothingness, just a dark hole that seemed to stretch infinitely. "How far down?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Far enough," Nathan replied. He was already moving toward the ladder. Ethan took a deep breath and followed. The air was musty, and the cold in the shaft was unbearable. His fingers clenched the cold metal of the ladder as he began to descend. Each rung creaked under his weight, the sound scraping against his ears like nails on a chalkboard. Sophia followed closely behind, her body tense, but she kept her eyes focused downward, as if trying to ignore the dark void beneath her. Ethan's mind raced. They had come so far, but where was Daniel? What had happened to him down here? And why did the bunker feel so much more alive now? As they descended further, a strange feeling began to creep over Ethan, a sense of being drawn into the darkness, as though something in the depths was calling to him. His heart rate quickened, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from the bottom of the shaft. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" Sophia whispered, her voice shaky. Ethan nodded, his throat dry. The sound had come from below, deep in the shaft. "I'll go first," Nathan said, his voice tight with tension. Without waiting for a response, he pushed ahead, his feet landing softly on the bottom. He turned and reached out for the others, helping them down one at a time. When they all finally reached the bottom, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The walls were slick with moisture, and the floor was uneven, littered with scraps of metal and broken equipment. In the dim light, Ethan could just make out the faint outlines of old storage rooms and crumbling walls, the remnants of a place that had been long abandoned. And then, he saw it. At the far end of the room, there was a small, rusted door. It had to be the entrance to the containment area. Nathan turned to the others. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "Daniel's in there." Ethan nodded, feeling a cold knot settle in his stomach. He could feel the eyes of the bunker on them. They were being watched. And there was no going back. The room felt unnaturally quiet as they approached the rusted door. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, thumping loudly in his ears, louder than the steady drip of water from the broken pipes above. It was as if the bunker itself had gone still, waiting for them to make their next move. Nathan took the lead again, his gun ready, his fingers brushing the cold handle of the door. It was heavy, too heavy. It didn't budge when he tried to open it. "Give me a hand," he muttered. Ethan and Sophia moved forward, each grabbing the handle and pulling with all their strength. The door screeched as it inched open, the sound like bones snapping. Inside, the room was flickering dimly. The lights were weak, barely casting any illumination on the room's contents. As their flashlights swept across the space, they saw rows of metallic cages, all empty. The air inside smelled thick, stale. And then they saw it. In the center of the room, there was a table, metal and cold, covered with papers and files. The surface was littered with strange markings, symbols Ethan couldn't make out. A small, flickering monitor sat beside it, its screen covered in static. "This is where they kept them," Nathan said softly, his voice cold. "This is where they kept the test subjects." Ethan shivered, a sense of dread settling into his bones. His eyes flicked to the corners of the room, where shadows seemed to move on their own. There were remnants of something, bodies, but not the way they should have been. Sophia's voice trembled. "Where's Daniel? We need to find him." Ethan scanned the room again, his pulse quickening. There was no sign of Daniel, only the traces of experiments gone wrong. He could almost smell the fear, the terror that had once filled this place. "Look at this." Nathan's voice broke through Ethan's thoughts. He had moved to the table, flipping through the files. "These are military reports. They were using prisoners for the experiments. But, there's something more." Ethan approached, his stomach turning as Nathan pointed to one of the papers. It was covered in bloodstains. "This," Nathan said, "says they were injecting them with something that shouldn't exist. Something that changes the mind." Sophia recoiled. "What the hell are you saying?" Nathan's eyes met hers. These people weren't just subjects, they were candidates. They were trying to create something dangerous. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still in the room with them. Something that had been here long after the military had abandoned the bunker. Suddenly, the monitor flickered to life. A low, crackling hum filled the air as the screen cleared. There, in the grainy footage, was Daniel, but he didn't look right. His eyes were wild, his body gaunt and emaciated, skin stretched tight over bone. His face, contorted. His mouth hung open in a scream that couldn't be heard, but his eyes, they stared straight through the camera, straight at Ethan. Ethan's heart stopped. He took a step forward, the urge to run now overwhelming. "No. That's not Daniel, that's not him. Get out!" Nathan shouted. "Move, now!" Ethan spun around, his feet heavy, and ran toward the door. But as they moved, the air shifted again, it was thick with heat. The walls groaned, the lights flickered and dimmed as a sudden sound filled the room. A low, wet slithering noise. Something was coming. Ethan felt his heart race faster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned to look, only to be met with darkness. There was nothing. Until the scream. A shrill, inhuman wail that seemed to rip through the walls, reverberating through their very bones. Ethan froze. Sophia clutched his arm. "We need to go. Now." But it was already too late. The doors slammed shut behind them, locking them inside. And from the shadows, something moved. Something hungry. The walls of the bunker seemed to close in on them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over his shoulder. The shrill scream from moments ago still echoed in his mind, but now there was something more, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and growing louder. Something was moving. He reached for the door handle, but it was already too late. The heavy, metal door had been locked from the outside, there was no escape through that way. Nathan was already at the far corner of the room, his gun raised and aimed at the shadows, his eyes scanning every inch of the darkened space. "It's in here," Nathan said, his voice tight, barely a whisper. "Stay close. Whatever it is, we need to move fast." Sophia's hands were shaking, but she gritted her teeth, trying to keep her composure. "We need to find another way out. The way we came in." Ethan turned to her, his mind racing. "No. We can't go back that way. That thing, whatever it is, was waiting for us down there. We'll never make it." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room. There has to be another exit. Somewhere. Ethan's pulse quickened as he glanced around, desperately searching for any hint of a way out. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should, the corners of the room growing darker, more oppressive. Then, through the dim light, he saw it. A small, hidden hatch in the wall, overlooked, almost as if it had been deliberately ignored. Ethan moved toward it without a second thought. "This way," he said urgently, his voice low. They rushed toward the hatch. Nathan reached it first, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled at the rusted handle. The metal creaked in protest, but after a few moments, it gave way. The hatch swung open to reveal a narrow tunnel leading downward. "It's our only chance," Nathan said. "We go down, we get out of here, now." Ethan nodded, pulling Sophia toward the opening. The tunnel was dark, barely wide enough for them to move through side by side, but it was their only way forward. As they crawled through the narrow space, the air grew colder, the walls slick with moisture. The sound of their movements echoed through the tunnel, and every step felt like it was being watched. Every inch they moved, the darkness seemed to press in closer. Suddenly, there was another sound, a wet scraping, like something dragging across the floor. Ethan's stomach dropped. "It's coming." Nathan's voice was hard. "Don't look back. Keep moving." They pushed forward, the tunnel narrowing even more as they moved. They could hear it now, the sound of something climbing, dragging itself toward them. The air was growing thick with fear. Ethan's heart raced, each breath coming faster than the last. They were almost at the end of the tunnel, but there was no way to know what awaited them. Finally, they emerged into a small, open space. A concrete room, the size of a storage closet. But there were no windows, no other exits, just a dead end. "No," Sophia's voice was filled with panic. "What now?" Nathan's eyes scanned the room, wild with desperation. There was nothing. The walls were bare. Nothing but the stone foundation and the faint, distant sound of something coming closer. Ethan's mind was racing. They had to do something. They couldn't just. A loud crash echoed behind them, shaking the walls, making the floor tremble beneath their feet. They turned just as the door to the room burst open. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall, misshapen, with wild, bloodshot eyes and skin stretched tight over bones. It moved with a twisted limp, dragging itself toward them. The creature, the thing, grinned, its teeth sharp and yellow. Ethan froze. It was too late. Nathan raised his gun, but before he could fire, the creature lunged. Everything happened at once. Screams, chaos, a deafening roar. Then, the world went dark.